Hello Internet, says Skorkowski, and welcome to part 6 of our review/game diary for the Pulp Cthulhu campaign, The Two-Headed Serpent. Today's thrilling episode will be covering Chapter 6, The Belgian Congo. This chapter is an optional adventure requiring that the player characters follow a particular set of steps in order to unlock it. It offers paranoia, amnesia, a lot of combat, and adds a great layer to the plot. Because it doesn't follow any linear place in the story's narrative, the player characters might experience this at any point between Chapters 2 and Chapter 7. So keepers will need to be ready to use this at a moment's notice if they do those particular things they need to do, and also keepers will want to lay down some breadcrumbs early on if they want the player characters to follow those breadcrumbs and hopefully unlock it at some point while they're playing this campaign. Now for this episode, we're going to be back to a full party, consisting of Buck Meyer, Jane Darling, JJ, and we'll be introducing our newest player character after the unfortunate death of Patch back in Iceland. However, before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So players, if you have any interest in playing this adventure, you'll want to stop. But keepers, stick around because we do have a lot to cover. Alrighty keepers, let's get this started. As I said, the scenario is a floating adventure, meaning that it could take place at any point between Chapters 2, when the player characters arrive in New York, and Chapters 8, when the player characters leave for Brazil. In the lowest basement of the Meetum building is a hallway that's actually a portal that leads to a secret facility off in the Belgian Congo. So all you need to do in order to run this scenario is to get the player characters to enter this hallway. Now, some ideas to help encourage this along the way is maybe have them stumble across a memo in the file room that discusses the excavation and the multi-million-dollar budget that's going down into this tunnel that's on the lowest level, a tunnel which, by the way, does not appear on any blueprint that the player characters can find of the Meetum building, and hopefully that will encourage them to maybe check this out. Or maybe if the player characters befriend Connors, the quartermaster, he might mention how strange it is that just truckloads of scientific and medical and building supplies keep being sent down to the lowest level of the Meetum building, but by his estimation, the volume of all the stuff that keeps getting sent down there is far greater than the basement or even the building could possibly hold. Now, of course, Connors is going to chalk this up to some sort of clerical error, how, nobody's ever filling out this paperwork, right? But once again, hopefully this will drop a nice little bug in the player characters here, and they're going to maybe want to check this out and see it for themselves. Now, the lowest levels are strictly off limits. In our campaign, Jane had been taken down to the upper of those two labs for her hybridization procedure, and Buck spent a limited time down there working down in the labs before a hilariously failed attempt at making a weird science device left Caduceus banning him from ever entering those labs again.
Yeah, it was going to be kind of this glue launcher. It fired these sticky globs that could capture and incapacitate our opponents. That way we could take them alive. Anyway, it was a pretty cool idea, but when you fail a creation roll as bad as I did, that stuff goes everywhere. Must have taken Caduceus a few days to clean up that mess.
But the lowest basement level is heavily secured. For our game, the heroes snuck down there at the end of the New York scenario as the building was evacuated. As they entered a hall, the last thing that they experienced was the door slamming shut behind them and the lights going out. And that's the start of the Belgian Congo adventure. The heroes suddenly awaken in a darkened room in hospital beds. It's warm and it's humid, and there's strange sounds that are coming beyond some shuttered windows. Opening them, the player characters are going to discover that outside is jungle and not New York City, which is where they last remembered being.
Holy crap, this is not where I parked my car. And who the hell is that?
The fourth person in the room was Boba, a bounty hunter. Raised in Mumbai, Boba moved to the United States and was taken under the wing of a local mob boss. Taking this player character's backstory, I worked it into the campaign by deciding that the local mob boss was Joe Bonanno, who Boba referred to as his Uncle Joe. Bonanno sent Boba into Caduceus to work as a spy some weeks before. Because Boba speaks several languages, he was quickly moved up through the ranks of Caduceus, but hadn't quite infiltrated the second tier where they explained to him what the mythos is. However, when Jane called in the bomb threat and the building was evacuated, Boba took that opportunity to sneak around and see what was going on. He reached the basement level and witnessed some of the weird experiments down there, and then he entered the portal about 10 minutes before the player characters arrived. Though he doesn't remember that last part quite yet because his memory is still a bit fuzzy.
Oh, Joe Bonanno was your adopted uncle? Okay, in that case, I got some good news and I got some bad news. The bad news is that Joe Bonanno was killed by a horrible monster that was sent by a race of other horrible monsters on their mission to destroy humanity. Now, the good news is that we are on a mission to stop those things before they can kill us, so welcome aboard. First thing, though, is we got to figure out just where in the hell we are.
It's about this time that a nurse walks in and the player characters learn that they're in a hospital in the village of Alunga. It's in a quarantine zone due to a massive outbreak of sleeping sickness that's being carried by tsetse flies. The staff, 1 doctor and 3 nurses, are all trying to help the massive number of refugees that have descended on this village. The doctor explains to him that the heroes were flying a caduceus shipment of medical supplies, but that their plane crashed when they were doing a nighttime landing at an abandoned diamond mine nearby. They've now spent 2 weeks in medical care.
Wait a second. Now you're saying that we were flying some medical aid to you over here in Africa. Yeah, that sounds like something we would have done, but why don't I remember any of this?
The doctor explains that they were all infected with this sleeping sickness, and temporary memory loss is going to be one of the side effects for it, but hopefully their memories will come back with a few interviews and talking to them and hopefully jog their memory. Now, a successful psychology check is going to reveal that this doctor is telling them the complete truth, or at least he believes that he is. Now, the real truth is much more complicated than that. Caduceus has this secret lab that's set up in the Congo where they're testing out their humanity-destroying drugs. The knockout agent that was deployed when the non-serpent people entered the hallway that led to the portal has rendered the player characters completely immune to the serpent person control serum, which they would normally use to interrogate the player characters as far as what they know. Because Caduceus is worried about what the player characters know, or if maybe they're secret agents for the Inner Night, Caduceus doesn't want to wait that long for the nerve agent to wear off so they can use the serpent person control serum. So instead they've done this elaborately pulpy plan in order to determine what the player characters know. Now, 2 of the nurses are really serpent people, while the other 2 are under the control of this control serum, and they believe absolutely everything that they're doing and saying with the player characters. However, my player characters still weren't buying the lie.
So, Doc, when you were examining me earlier, did you happen to notice anything, unusual about my skin?
Keepers, I really suggest that you add some details here to help sell this story to them. The player characters should be in different clothes than they were when they entered the tunnel. It might be a giveaway if they arrive in Africa being told that they were part of some sort of expedition to deliver medical supplies, but they're still wearing all their nice suits and everything that they last remembered wearing in New York. Also, you could have that the nurses were regularly shaving the player characters and cleaning them up, in order to inspect for bites. And this is going to explain why they don't suddenly have 2 weeks worth of beards, because in actuality, it's only been about 24 to 48 hours since they actually entered the hallway. Now, the doctor is going to conduct a series of interviews to help the player characters regain their memory. It's at this point that the player characters in my group are really trying to find a hole in the plot about the supposed crash.
Now, when you arrived at the crash site, would you say that our airplane was more or less intact? No? How so? The wing came off. Which one? The left one. Okay, that's interesting to hear. Would you mind sending in one of the other nurses? I got a few questions for her, too. So when our plane crashed, were both of the wings still intact on the wreckage?
My player characters started asking some very specific questions, trying to poke holes in the story. Now, what they don't know is that the doctor's office and their bedroom is bugged by 2 serpent people nurses that are listening in. And this is going to allow them to keep their story straight because they hear what questions are being asked and how they're being answered. So keepers, figure out what the story is beforehand and then adapt that story as the questioning is going on. The serpent people are listening in and either changing their story in order to account for any holes that are found and telling the nurse and the doctor how to change their story based off what they're hearing is going on in the interview room. And that way the player characters can break apart what the story is and how it was supposed to be presented, rather than breaking it apart because you hadn't prepared a good story beforehand, and that's what they think they're latching on to. Also, drop in some early hints about this serum. I had the doctor mention the raspberry tea that Nurse DeVoot was making for him, and my plan was that Buck, who had encountered the raspberry-scented control serum serum when he did his transatlantic terror side quest would recognize the hint of this raspberry flavoring, and maybe that would tip him off that there was serpent person control serum involved.
Raspberry tea? No thank you. I am immune to subtle hints. Or even blatant hints, for that matter.
When the player characters explore the village, they'll see all the refugees here. I recommend adding a ring of burning fires around here and attempt to have the smoke chase away all the infected tsetse flies. Now somewhere in here they're also going to meet Kasongo, the local chief, and a pair of cryptozoologists have come into the quarantine zone after hearing some stories of giant monsters being reported in the area. Now, one clue in the village is that the serpent people are hiding some files as well as a canister of infected tsetse flies that they can open via a remote control, and they're hiding these all in a shed that's behind Kasongo's hut. But there's nothing really given in the module to help the player characters to discover this secret. So I had the heroes notice that one of the nurses lurking around the hut, maybe stepping outside, locking a padlock, kind of looking around suspiciously and walking off. And when they asked the Kasongo about it, Kasongo told him that, well, the medical team needed to use his hut for some stuff, but he doesn't know what's in there. After a supply drop missed the village, several of the villagers as well as the chief went off to go recover these important medical supplies. The player characters then took that opening to then break into the hut. Once inside, they discovered the canister of tsetse flies and all of the incriminating evidence. They burned all that up in a fire, and then they marched back to the hospitals to get answers because they now knew that the serpent people were involved. They lured one of the nurses into their room and then struck her, breaking the illusion of the consume likeness spell, revealing that she wasn't human. After they killed her, they then tried to bring in the doctor and the other nurses one at a time to show them this and see how they reacted. However, the second serpent person there was listening in through the bug in their room and decided to make a break for it. Buck chased her down in the jungle, but alone and completely unarmed against the serpent person soldier, he was quickly killed and his body hurled off of a cliff. Jane managed to catch up with the serpent person, and she pulled off an impaling strike with her bite attack, killing the serpent person. It was about this time that Buck came climbing up over the cliff that he was thrown down.
Holy crap, I thought I was a complete goner back there, but as luck would have it, I landed on top of one of those giant ant hills, and that broke my fall. And then all those little ants, they started biting me because I just broke their home and everything like that. And something that was in those ant bites must have counteracted the serpent person venom that I thought had killed me. It also seemed to have kick-started my heart again because I woke up and I am ready to get back into the fight. Also, and this is completely unrelated to that, I'm completely out of luck points now.
Now, as at this time, my player characters decided to leave the village. Now, the module has information in case they decide to go north and try to take the river, where they'll be attacked by dinosaurs, tsetse flies, serpent person patrols, and a very long journey home. Most likely, they're going to be captured or killed if they try to take this route. But our heroes decided to go south and check out this diamond mine that they'd been hearing about, and with them they brought their chief and the cryptozoologist. But a few miles into the hike, they were then attacked by a serpent person riding a T-Rex. This encounter is going to be very, very tough, because unlike that sweet picture that you see there of all the player characters firing guns, the player characters are going to have nothing but machetes and spears in order to fight this thing. The T-Rex has 44 hit points and 10 points of armor, and the rider is armed with a laser staff. Now, Manville is armed with not only the most macho name ever, but also has an elephant gun. He managed to take down the T-Rex down enough in order for the player characters to finish it off, but not before he died, leaving that sweet gun which only had 3 shells left in it for the player characters. Now, they picked that up just in time for the second T-Rex to burst through the jungle, but now armed with the elephant gun and the laser staff that ignores armor completely, it was a much easier fight for them to do.
Killing a T-Rex has always been a dream of mine, but in that dream I was using my Lewis gun and not this crappy little machete, which, by the way, this thing requires an impaling strike even to pierce its armor.
Now, Keepers, one suggestion I have, if you want to arm your player characters more than with just spears and machetes and not let all the NPCs do the heavy lifting with their firearms, is to maybe have the serpent people back at the hospital have some weapons that are hidden inside their room, like a single flame pistol and a single laser staff. So that way it's not enough to arm all of them, but it's enough to give them a little bit more of an edge than letting the NPCs with their rifles help take care of their problems for them. maybe have one or two old and battered rifles that are somewhere in this village that the player characters can get their hands on. Maybe it's in the shed with all of the incriminating evidence, or it's somewhere outside the village and the chief can lead them off to go do this, which means they might have to, dodge some tsetse flies or any other things like that in order to recover just a handful of rifles. Eventually, the player characters will make it to the abandoned diamond mine and discover that not only has a giant pyramid been erected inside the pit, but that's surrounded by a horde of shambling people whose brains have been destroyed due to the serpent people testing. Among them should be several familiar faces to the player characters, such as Bolivian soldiers from Chapter 1, Icelandic villagers, Oklahoma townsfolk, several New York gangsters, if they didn't get wiped out the way my group did, or several old friends from the Medium building that maybe stuck their nose in the wrong spot and then vanished. It'd be very cool if you actually set that up early on in the campaign, have them befriend somebody, and then all of a sudden they're gone one day, and there's kind of a vague report of maybe they left for another job, but oops, now here they are. Now, keeping their trail clean, what's been happening is Caduceus has been going around after the player characters leave any of these sites, and they've been gathering these people up and then sending them off to the Congo, where they're basically having their brains destroyed as test subjects. Now, these zombies aren't going to attack the player characters as they walk past them, unless one of their serpent people masters orders them to. Now, once the heroes make it inside the lab, they're going to be encountering more freakish and inhumane testing and one hell of a great fight. Now, during this combat, Jane was seriously wounded, but the PCs managed to revive her and administer first aid. They then realized that she had reached the fourth and final stage of hybridization. Her skin sloughed off, and Jane was now a full-blown serpent person.
Son of a bitch! Well, this is just f***ing perfect.
Inside the record room, they're going to discover Caduceus' plan to turn humanity into a slave race beneath the serpent people, and how biomechanical flies can be made at the Lost Citadel and the Lost Continent of Mu as a way to administer this drug across the world. They also discovered some of the memos that they had missed from the Chapter 2 adventure describing the Internites' plan for world destruction if they can reach the Lost Continent of Mu as well. They also discovered that the Citadel, then the facility at the Lost Continent of Mu, is powered directly by the mythos god Gantanathoa. Using his weird science ability, Buck figured out how to operate the gate that leads back to the Medium building in New York City, and that he can rig the lab's nuclear reactor in order to explode and detonate, destroying everything after they leave. They sent Kasongo and the professor back to the village with the antidote for the sleeping sickness to administer to everyone, and assured them that the village was well out of the range of any blast zone. However, before the player characters could leave the Belgian Congo, Jane said,
"Look, guys, I can't go back to New York looking like this, so I tell you what, let me go back outside and find the prettiest of those mindless test subjects out there, and, yeah, you don't want to know what I'm about to do to her."
Jane found one of the women from Bingham, Oklahoma, her brains destroyed by the serpent people. After cleaning her up, doing her hair, plucking her eyebrows, getting her nails and everything else perfect, Jane cast Consume Likeness and spent the next few days slowly devouring this poor woman.
What? She was as good as dead already. Don't judge me.
Buck took this time to fortify the pyramid's doors from being opened up from the outside. He shut off any access from the gate, that way no one from New York could come into the facility through that entrance, and using his weird science ability, modified several of the laser staffs in order to speed up their charge time. Once they were ready, they headed back into New York, arriving at the Medium building somewhere around 2 a.m. They discovered a guard stationed outside the door, but fortunately that guard was asleep and they were able to quickly subdue him. Trying to decide what to do next, they then headed back to their homes. However, once Buck reached his apartment, he discovered a note under the door from Philip Connors, warning him not to go inside his apartment and ordered him to contact Connors at once. He and his friends were in mortal danger. And that's it for the Belgian Congo chapter. Overall, I really like this adventure. It's one of my favorite scenarios in the campaign. Keepers are going to need a lot of improvisation during this scenario because it can go a whole lot of different ways. Once again, I strongly urge keepers to prepare what the official story about the crash is ahead of time. In fact, I would write it out like a detailed script. And maybe that's going to give a hint to your players because when they're interviewing the people, they're using some of the same phrasing because they're just reciting the same script depending on what questions that they're asked. And that could be a nice little way to kind of clue them in that these people are under the serpent person control serum. My only other complaint is that the player characters are going to be very underarmed once the fighting begins. Now, 2 of the player characters they encounter are going to have guns, but I strongly suggest that you add a firearm somewhere, or maybe arm those 2 serpent person spies. That once way the player characters take them out, they can then take their weapons, and that'll give them something to fight the T-Rex with, or whatever it else is that they encounter. Now, join us next episode as the plot thickens as we face off against 2 of our enemies in Chapter 7, Calcutta.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you want to see some more of this series or some of our other reviews, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, heroes, you have a great day. You know, I confess I always had a little bit of a crush on Jane, but after watching her eat that lady whole, I think I'm over it.